War. War never changes.
Though Fallout's world resembles what ours would look like if it were nuked back to the Stone Age, Fallout's history actually begins to diverge from reality well before the bombs fell in 2077 and things went way off the rails. Here's what you need to know. This is Fallout in 5 minutes. Sort of. Everything you need to know about the story so far. The first major divergence from real-world history happens in 1961. The first American astronaut, Carl Bell, is killed on re-entry after successfully orbiting the Earth. From there, things start to get weird. For one thing, semiconductors are never invented, which explains all the vacuum tubes. In 1969, the United States restructures from 50 states to 13 commonwealths, and a new flag is adopted. That's where Fallout 4's New England Commonwealth, or the Commonwealth, comes from. In 2037, the Mr. Handy robotic butler and laborer is invented. Something tells us he'll come in handy later on. 22-year-old genius Robert House starts up Robco Industries in Las Vegas in 2042. Its products include the Pip-Boy wrist computer, the Stealth Boy personal cloaking device, and the Securitron security robot. In 2044, Nuka-Cola takes America by storm. Everyone loves them bottle caps. In 2051, oil is starting to run out, and the US annexes Mexico to get hold of more. But that's just the beginning. In the next year, plagues kill tens of thousands, and a series of resource wars break out between Europe, the Middle East, China, and the United States. The UN collapses. It is the beginning of the end, folks. After a few years of that chaos, the US government commissions Vault-Tec Corporation to build 122 vaults across the country in 2054. The public is told that they're nuclear fallout shelters, but the secret purpose is to run social experiments on isolated groups of people so that the elite will have a smoother ride when they bail on Earth for another planet. Things really start to hit the fan in 2066 when China invades Alaska. This is when the Fallout 3 DLC Operation Anchorage takes place. A year later, a defense contractor called West-Tech invents the T-45D power armor, and heavily armored soldiers join the war efforts against China. In 2072, Harold is born, who we'll see a lot more of. In 2073, West-Tech begins experiments on what would eventually become the forced evolution virus, the green stuff that turns people into super mutants at the Mariposa military base. In 2076, the US officially annexes Canada and martial law is declared. And then, on October 23, 2077, the United States and China wage a nuclear war that destroys the world in just 2 hours. It's unknown which side launched the first nuke, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. People rush to the vaults and seal themselves inside. That includes your character from Fallout 4 and Harold. The President and remains of the US government take refuge in an offshore oil rig based in the Pacific, becoming the Enclave. Their mission is to eventually recolonize the continent with pure, unmutated Americans and wipe out the threat of communism once and for all. Pretty much, they're jerks. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of Steel is founded by US Army Captain Roger Maxson. His unit survived the war at the Mariposa military base, but discovered that the scientists there had used human test subjects for the FEV and created the first super mutants. Maxson leaves Mariposa and sets up the Brotherhood headquarters at the Lost Hills bunker. The Brotherhood of Steel believes in preserving advanced technology, though that mostly involves hoarding it for themselves and not sharing it with other people who need it. They're the good guys, but just barely. Using a network of satellites and lasers, Robert House successfully defends Las Vegas from nuclear annihilation. He puts his body into stasis and wires his brain into a supercomputer, effectively making himself immortal. Shortly after the war, inhabitants of Vault 87 in Washington, D.C. were exposed to the FEV and turned into super mutants. Those mutants began abducting and mutating humans wherever they could find them. That's where Fallout 3 and 4 get their super mutants. For a long time, the world remained borderline uninhabitable. Then, in 2090, Harold leaves Vault 29 and becomes a successful trader in the wastelands. 12 years later, his caravans are being attacked by mutants, so along with Dr. Richard Gray, who was exiled from Vault 8 for murder, he mounts an expedition to find their source. They rediscover the Mariposa military base, where both men are infected by the FEV. Harold becomes an immortal ghoul, while Gray becomes a hideous mutant called the Master. The Master, who is super crazy, begins building himself an army of super mutants. That goes on until 2161, when Fallout 1 takes place in the ruins of California. Vault 13's water purification ship breaks, and a single Vault dweller is sent out to find a new one. In the course of his search, he discovers the Master's invasion plans and destroys the Mariposa base along with the Master himself. But then the Vault dweller is cast out of Vault 13, so he leaves and founds the village of Arroyo in 2165. A new power emerges in the West in 2189, when the new California Republic is founded by the descendants of Vault 15 on top of their settlement, Shady Sands. The NCR is generally a force for good, but is usually too bogged down with bureaucratic red tape to actually make a difference. In 2197, Fallout Tactics takes place near Chicago, but Bethesda doesn't consider much of this canon, so let's move on. In 2231, Edward Sallow, aka Caesar, is born near the Boneyard settlement in Los Angeles. He'll go on to found Caesar's Legion, a brutal dictatorship in Colorado based on the model of ancient Rome. In 2241, Fallout 2 takes place, starring one of the original Vault Dwellers' descendants born in Arroyo. The Enclave emerges from their oil rig base and abducts the inhabitants of Arroyo and Vault 13 as test subjects for its genocidal virus. In the end, the oil rig base is destroyed and the Enclaves flee east. The Brotherhood also expands to the east and sends a detachment to set up shop in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. under the command of Elder Owen Lyons. 36 years later, and on the other side of the country, Fallout 3 takes place when your character's father leaves Washington, D.C.'s Vault 101 and you go after him. The Enclave emerges as a threat on the East Coast, but their plan to use another biological weapon to cleanse the world is once again thwarted. Oh, and Harrell's there, and he's a tree now. In 2281, Fallout New Vegas takes place. Caesar's Legion, the NCR, and Mr. House battle it out for control of the Nevada wasteland, and depending on which choices players made throughout the game, one of these factions gains control of the American Southwest. Around the same time, a vault opens on the outskirts of the former city of Boston, and a new dweller emerges to venture forth into the wasteland.